You're here. Good. Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Mem Ches. In Ksubas, we learned from Forshlam Yosef Azriel Ben Chaim Michal and Elos Ben Reuma. Yesterday we got down about 10, 11 lines down on the page. The Mishnah had said that at the end of the Mishnah said that Rav Yehuda says, even what are the obligations of a father to his daughter, again, until the age of 12 and a half, until she becomes a bogeret, and what are the obligations of a husband to his wife? And Rav Yehuda said, even the poorest man in Israel should at least provide for his wife 2 flutes and a wailer at the wedding, at her funeral. In other words, they used to have these ladies who would, wailers, or what do you call them? They would wail out and scream, etc. Whatever they did. So that's what Rav Yehuda said. Says the Gemara, Mechlal the Tanakama Savar Hani Lo. Mashma, according to Tanakama, you don't have to provide that. The poor person's poor, and he can't provide a proper funeral with the wailers and the flutes. He doesn't have to. What are the circumstances? I'm going to talk now about customs that a wife had versus a husband. Either urcha, if the custom in her family was that's how you do a funeral with the wailers and the flutes. My Tanakama, why is the Tanakama low? If that's what her family's custom was, why shouldn't the husband provide that for her? Either lav urcha, and if it's not her custom, my time at Rav Yehuda, what's Rav Yehuda's reasoning? In other words, if it's not her custom to do that, and he's poor, he doesn't do it. Why should all of a sudden he have to provide these appurtenances, these special accompaniments at the funeral? Here's what happened. It was the custom in his family to provide those accessories at the funeral, but it wasn't her custom. The Tanakama Savrakia mean an Ola Imo Vani Yoris. We're going to have a klal later on talk about this, that if a husband and wife get married, they have different customs. So let's say he has customs, he gets treated better, he's like a higher class of person. She rises up with him. He has to provide for her the same way that he is accustomed to. So Ola me, she goes up with him, but let's say his customs are less. He provides less for his family. Because his family, they didn't do those kind of things. She doesn't have to go down with him. She goes up with him. She rises with him. She doesn't go down with him. So here what happened was it was the custom for her family to have those accessories at the funeral, but not his. So why shouldn't he provide it for her? She's not supposed to go down with him. He's supposed to provide her in the way that she was normally accustomed to. So he says like this: when do we say Ola Imova and Eredismo? She rises up with him to his standards of, let's say, of living, and she doesn't go down to his standards if his standards are less. That's only one while she's alive. So low. Tanakama says, listen, while she was alive, we say it was the custom in his family was to provide those things, but it wasn't her family. I might have said it the other way around. The custom in his family was to have those accompaniments at the funeral, to have, let's say, a better funeral, but it wasn't her custom. So normally, though, she has to, if it's his custom, he has to provide for her just as is his custom. His custom is at a higher standard, but that's only because Tanakama when they're alive. After death, he doesn't have to provide for her according to his higher standard. That's the Tanakama Shita. Why the poor person does not have to provide that special funeral for his wife, because it wasn't her custom to do that, and his custom it was, but now she's dead. Even after Misa, even after she dies, he has to provide for her in the same standard that he has, if he has the higher standard. That's the machlokas over here. Looks like Rav Yehuda that if he had a higher standard, he has to provide that for his wife even after death. Another thing that Rav said, listen to this carefully. A man became insane. He lost his mind, and he could no longer provide for his family in the normal way that they were accustomed to. So Bezdin takes over his assets. Bezdin, and they feed his family, Mafarnasin, and they clothe them. They provide for the whole family. His Isha, his wife, his children, and another thing as well. We'll talk about what that other thing is soon. But now, in other words, if a person became insane, the court appoints let's say, a guardian, and they provide for his family all the things that they need. That's what it says, even his children. Even though Minatori doesn't provide for his children, we said once they're 6 years old, but that's what he was doing till now. So if he became insane, the court assumes that he would have wanted to do that too. Rashi, how is this different from the time we learned in a brisa? A man went overseas and he left his family destitute without providing for them. Now his wife is demanding, she's demanding support. She needs food. That's why he just left his wife. Guy just up and left. Didn't provide anything for his wife. Bezin goes into his assets. They go then. The Zonim Farnas and Sishto, they feed and they provide for his wife, clothing, etc. Not his children. Only for his wife, not for his children. And not the other thing. We'll talk about what the other thing is. So he said to Ravina said to Rashi, how is it different? How is it different when a man became insane that the Bezin goes in and provides for his whole family, including his wife, including his children? And where he left overseas and left them, he only provides for the wife, not for the children. You don't see the difference between a person who left willingly and with knowledge and knew what he was doing versus a person who left, so to speak, left society by becoming insane. When a guy became insane, we assume that it was against his will. It became insane, right? It's not something he does willingly. So Bezin says, listen, if he was providing for his children and for his family till now, we'll do the same thing. We understand. We figure out this is what he would have wanted to do. But when a man on his own bought a plane ticket and left his family destitute, obviously he didn't mean to provide for them because he could have and he didn't. So therefore, his wife he has to provide for because that's the ksuba. Unless he divorces her, he dies and gives her the ksuba. By law, he has to provide for his wife, but not for his children. So that's the difference. Okay, that's the difference between the two cases. What is this other thing we talk about? That he said that he provides for his. If he left them destitute, they go into his assets and they provide for his wife, but not for his children, and not davracha. My davracha. So the machlokes. Rav Chisda says that tachshit, ornaments or cosmetics. Rashi says it's like stuff to make his wife nice, to make her pleasant. Rav Yosef mitztaka. You go in and you take out money from his assets to give to tzedakah, like they force it out of it, like the schnorrer comes to your door and just grabs the money out of your pocket. They take it away. He took it away from him. Rav says, no, you don't provide that. If you say, listen, if you don't provide for his wife ornaments or cosmetics to make her beautiful, and if he says you don't provide that, certainly Koshka and Stucca, you're not going to go in and start taking money out of his pocket for Stucca. Stucca, you give willingly. You don't go and take it out of him and to take it out against his will. Mandam Stucca, the one who said Stucca, you don't give Stucca. Maybe you would give her his wife ornaments or cosmetics or jewelry. You don't want her to become repulsive. Doesn't mean just extra jewelry. It means stuff to make her nice. Rashi is like stuff that they sell, perfumes and things like that, to make her presentable. So that's the Pashut Shad way we learn over here, that when he went overseas, his wife, you have to give her sustenance, provide for her food and clothing, etc. But not his wife, not his children, and not tachshitim. Right, not tachshitim. If you learn that davracha is tachshitim, if you learn that the davracha is tzedakah, tachshitim you would provide because he wouldn't want to become repulsive. Rashi learns a different way, that this business about the tachshit and the tzedakah is not going on where you don't provide in the case where he went overseas willingly, or where he became a shota, the other way around. In other words, the one who says that you say when he became a shota, you provide from Farsan's Ishto, Banavnosa, Vidavracher. That means you do provide those things. So if you provide, you assume that he was giving tzedakah, he was giving 10 or 20% of his money anyway to tzedakah. So you assume that now too, if you say davracher. So if you say davracher is tzedakah, then certainly you would provide cosmetics for his wife. If you say that you provide cosmetics for his wife, that's what you mean when he became a shota, not necessarily tzedakah. That's what Rashi says. People are going to say, "Mandam tzedakah kol shein tachshit, mandam tzedakah tzedakah lo." Hasan atam lo, he doesn't want to become repulsive. Amar Rav Chia bar Rav and Amar Rav Huna. Mishach Manas want to say a man went overseas, umeisa ishto, and his wife died. Man went overseas, left town. He was on a business trip. Not that he didn't provide for his wife. He provided for his wife for basic food and clothing. But now his wife died and he wasn't here. So Bezin goes into his assets. Who's going to pay for the funeral? So they didn't have bituach leumi in those days, to cover it. The government didn't pay for it. So who's going to pay for the funeral? Bezin goes into his assets and they pay they bury her lechfi chvodo, according to the husband's honor. In other words, what the standard would be in his family. It says more lechfi chvodo v'lechfi chvodo. What happens if she was used to a bigger funeral? They had trumpets and whatever, a nicer entourage, whatever the thing was, a nicer coffin. What happens if she was used to more? Like Rashi explains, even if you say before we had a shail of Oli, we said Oli Mo Ben Yardisimo, she doesn't go down with him. That's only Mechayim according to the Takama, but not Lachar Misa. But over here, that's and Yoredisimo, she doesn't go down, even Lachar Misa. Says Rashi, if it's something that she was used to, her standard, even according to Tanakama who learned before, that in the case, we said the poor person, the Tanakama says you don't have to provide a fancy, let's call that a fancy funeral with wailers and trumpets and things like that and flutes. That only applies while she's alive. Now, when she's not after death, he doesn't apply. But in Yoredisisly, she doesn't go down in standard even after death. If her family, she was used to a certain standard, you have to provide. That's always the problem with, we always say that if you're giving advice to a young man, be careful if you marry a wealthy girl because she's used to living at a higher standard, right? Not so simple. She's got high maintenance, right? A high maintenance girl, it might look attractive, but wait till you see what she's used to, right? So here it says you have to provide for according to what she's used to. So what do you mean? You bury him according to his standard, not of her standard. Certainly you bury her according to her standard. Yeah, according to her standard, if her standard is higher. But let's say his standard is higher, you have to bury her according to the husband's standard, and even after death, like Kamashman, Olimo that this shows us like the sheet of Rav Yehuda in our Mishnah, that she rises with him, doesn't go down with him. She rises with him if he has a higher standard, even after death. We had the machlokas before. That's what we started off today. Rav Yehuda says she rises with him even after death. Tanakama says no, after death she doesn't have to rise with him, but she certainly doesn't go down with him. The Chiddush says no, that even if he has a higher standard and it's after death, she also goes up with that, and he has to provide. The Bezin would provide a proper funeral for him, lefi chvodo, even if his standard is higher than hers, and even if it's after death, we go like Rav Yehuda, that she rises up with him even after death. Let's say a man is dying, man's on his deathbed, and he says, "Listen, when she dies, I don't want you to pay." He announces to his children on his deathbed, when his wife dies, he's dying now, but when his wife dies later on, I don't want to pay for the funeral. That's what he says. All right, so Shomala, we listen to him. Okay. So the Gemara says, why does he have to? What difference does it make if he said that on it? Maishna ki Omar. What's the difference if he said, I don't want to provide for her burial, for her funeral? Remember something. When he dies, she gets the ksuba. She's paid off, right? She gets the money. And who gets his Yerusha? His children. He's telling his children, listen, I'm dying now. When I die, whenever she dies later on, you don't have to pay for the funeral. Of course, they don't have to pay for the funeral. She gets her ksuba, and that's it. And she's going to pay from her own money for the funeral. His children don't have to pay for her funeral, even if it's her children. Ki Amar, if he said it, because the nechas and the assets go to the children, right? Go to the Yisomim, and she gets her ksuba. She has to pay for them. Even if he doesn't say anything. If a man dies, what's the rule? I'm not talking about today when you have wills and usually the wife gets all the assets, etc. Of course, you pay out of her money. Even then, you pay out of her money. The children don't have to provide for his wife's funeral, even if it's their mother. They have their own. She has her own money, right? She has her own money. They should pay for the funeral. You think there aren't fights today about who pays for funerals? People have fights. Still pay for a funeral. You have to pay out of assets. Why she? Of course, his assets don't have to pay for her funeral. She's going to die 10 or 20 years later. You don't take money from his estate. The kids have that estate. She gets her money from the ksuba. Ella means this. Ha'omer and Mace doesn't mean if she dies, don't pay out of your assets for the funeral because she has her own money. Ha'omer and Mace who lo tikru. He says like this. He said, listen, the guy's on his deathbed. He said, listen, if I die, don't bury him out of my assets. In other words, let the Kehillah pay for the funeral. Ancient, we don't listen to him. That's what we mean. Not that we listen to him in the case of the wife. His wife's going to die later on. Of course, the children don't have to pay for the funeral. Man says like this: when I die, I don't want you to take my money to pay for the funeral. I want to follow on the public funds. Ain't shomelo lav kolemenu. He's not empowered. Sheyashir is manav to make his children wealthy. Tzibur at the expense of the public. Not like today when you have a Bituach Leumi pays for the funeral, But it's he can't do that. He can't say, listen, I don't want to pay. Rich man dies, and he doesn't want his family to pay for the funeral from his assets. He says, keep the money, let the tzibur pay for the funeral. That you can't do.
But he's not obligated to do the agreement, but you said ketubot.
No, we're not talking about her now. We're talking about him. He says on his own funeral, I'm about to die. I don't want to pay for my own funeral. I want the shul to pay for my funeral. Right? That's what he says. Because you can't do that. That you can't do. Pardon? No, but we shouldn't. We're saying you don't listen to him. All right. Says the Mishnah. Now we've been talking about a girl who is until she's a bogeres, right? If she's at home, the father has reshus to marry her off. If she's not fully married, again, once she's 12 and a half or she's fully married, then the father has no reshus over her. But if she's still a naura, she's up until the age of 12 and a half, and she's not fully married, then she belongs to the father. So the Gemara said like this, Mishnah like this, only she belongs to the father. Again, he has dominion over her, keeps her paycheck, takes her findings, anything that she finds, etc. He breaks her nedarim. He decides who she marries. He even accepts her divorce if she's not fully married yet. Until she goes into Rishus of the Baal. Now, what does the Rishus of the Baal mean? We're talking about a girl who is either single, totally single, or she's betrothed. If she's betrothed, we know that both the husband, the fiance, and the father both break the nedarim together. But otherwise, she's really, even if she's just betrothed, she doesn't belong to her husband yet. And as we said before, if she dies now, he doesn't inherit her, right? We had a shaila about that before in Machlokas, whether the husband inherits her or not, but he certainly doesn't get more than the 100 or the 200, he doesn't get the whole thing. Until it goes into Rishus of the Baal. Now, the Rishus of the Baal means what? It means the Nesuin, the Chuppah, right? That's what he means. But we're going to see now that there's another thing. There's something which is almost the equivalent of the Chuppah, which is the father giving her over to the husband. In those days, it wasn't like they all came to the wedding. They lived far apart, and they would send the girl. They had betrothal. They got engaged. Months later, she got equipped, and she had her dowry and all that. And they would send the girl to the husband to get married there. So just handing her over to the husband or to his messengers is considered like a chuppah, That's what we're going to see now. Is it not? It's not 100% like a chuppah, but we're going to see how much it is. So, Masa, what did the Mishnah say here? She's always until she goes to Rishus Baal, Linasuin, for marriage. Masar Av l'shulcha Baal. Let's say the father gave her over to the messengers of the husband. They said, listen, the guy said, I want to get married already. It's months going by. I want to get married. He sent messengers, and the father gave him over to the messengers. It belongs to Rishus Baal. In what sense? Well, the Gemara is going to talk about how much is it considered like as if they're married. But if the father didn't hand her over, he went along with me. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll come with you. I'll come with you to the wedding. So he didn't really give her up yet. Or the messengers of the father went with Shlucha Baal. Again, we're talking about a girl up to the age of 12 and a half. Once 12 and a half, she has no rishus over here. He's still considered Rishus of Notice the father hasn't handed her over completely. He's still there. He's still involved. He's still with her. Then she's still in Rishus of the father. If either we said before, if the father gave it to Rishus Baal or the messengers of the father gave her up to Rishus Baal and they withdrew, so first let's understand the first word of the mission. The first word of the mission was la'olam. She's always in the Rishus of the father. What does it mean la'olam? What does it mean la'olam? Until she goes to the father, not forever. My lums, Lapukim Mishnah Rishon, the Tanan, Tiksuf Mishnah Rishon. We're going to have later on a Mishnah next week, that says over there Igiyas man v'lo nisu. Let's say they got engaged. Now 12 months go by, and he didn't marry her. He didn't marry her. He was lazy. He didn't get his money together. The husband didn't marry her, or he had some accident. Well, ochlos mishalov ochos b'truma. The Mishnah over there says, pardon?
Or there was a pandemic.
Oh, there's a pandemic, whatever. That's right. He gives mom nisu. She's entitled to eat from him and eat. She has to provide for her, and she eats truma. Right? That's what the Mishnah says. Kamashmala, no, that's not true. Why? Because there's two different opinions. We're gonna have there's what's called the Mishnah Rishon and Mishnah Achrona. The first Mishnah held that, listen, what's the reason? Remember, when a man, we talked yesterday about a kinyan. When a man marries a wife, betroths a wife, right? Gets betrothed a wife, he really owns her. They're married. She's good. If she has to be with somebody else, it's adultery. She gets skila, right? If she's a nara psula, she gets skila, right? Or if she's older, if even was just betrothed, maybe she's 20 years old and he betrothed her, he gave her Mekudeshesly, she got a ring, she got money. She's his wife, not fully his wife, but she's his wife. It's adultery. So really, a man owns her. So technically, if a Kohen marries her, right, she can eat truma, technically, right? So we said she shouldn't eat truma at that point until she gets married. Okay. So later on, the Gemara is going to say, yeah, but if 12 months go by and he hasn't married her yet, she's entitled to eat. The Mishnah says over there, and she's entitled to eat truma. That's what the Mishnah Rishona says. What's the reason why she doesn't eat truma while they're engaged? There's two reasons brought down. One is because if she's still at her father's house, she might give some to her family. So as a precaution, we don't give. But if 12 months go by and he hasn't married her yet, then he has an obligation to provide for her an apartment. He has to give her a house to live in. And therefore, if she goes into that house, we're not worried that she's going to give to her family. She's not living with her family anymore. That's what the first Mishnah said. Mishnah Achrona said, no, she can't eat truma at all until they actually consummate. Why? Because the other reason for not eating truma is not because she might give it to her brothers and family, etc., but because when he actually consummates, he might find something's wrong with her. He didn't realize that she's got a big scar, she's got tattoos all over her body, or whatever. And he says, wait a minute, mekachtos, I didn't mean to, this is not a marriage, this is not what I expected. You told me that you were free of any blemishes, and now it's called simpun. She might have a blemish. If that's the case, mekachtos means deals off. There's no marriage. There's no marriage. She ate truma, which is an isser under punishment of death if you're not a Kohen or married to a Kohen. The marriage was off and she shouldn't have eaten the truma. So the second reason of simpun applies even after 12 months. Second says, no, you can't eat truma until he consummates the marriage, because he might find out that it's a mekachtos. If it's money matters, taking your Yerusha, money, paychecks and things like that, okay, fine. That's always refundable. You can go back on that. But if you ate truma and you're not a Kohen, you're not married to a Kohen, that's a problem. So that's what he says. Kamashman la'olam. No, he can never. Means la'olam, not just 12 months. You don't say that if 12 months go by, she can eat truma. No, la'olam, she can't eat truma at all until they actually consummate. That's what we mean. So we said, listen, if the father or his messengers gave her to the shluchim of the Baal, then she's Rishus Baal. So what does that mean? In what sense? Are they fully married? That they have a chuppah? They haven't consummated yet. All they've done is he's given her over to the husband or to his messengers. So Rav says like this, everything. He gets her paycheck. Rash says, he gets her paycheck. And if he's a Kohen, he would go to the funeral, but not Truma. Why? Truma, we worry about, like I said, maybe he'll consummate, find out that she's got a blemish that he can't live with. He'll say mekachtos, say for she doesn't eat Truma. Rav Asi Omer Afli Truma. Rav says, no, she can even eat Truma. Why? Because Rav Asi's opinion is that the reason why the rabbi said that an arusa shenai Truma is not because are you worried about simpa. And that's a milsa lo shchicha, that she's going to have a blemish and he's going to claim mekachtos. No, the reason is because he's going to give it to her. She's going to give some to her family. And after 12 months, you're not worried about it. She'll live in the husband's apartment. Okay. So Rav says that when handing her over to the husband, it's like they're married. Rashi says, in fact, Mr. Russell called Yorsha, he would inherit her if she died now. If he's a Kohen, he could even go to her funeral. It's like a chuppah. It's on all sense, except for Truma, because he's worried about simpon. Ravasi is after Truma. Eser Rav Huna Ravasi. Rav Huna asks Kasha v'Amila Chia Barav Ravasi. Notice the names. Rav Huna was a student of Rav. We always have Rav Huna Marav. And Rav Huna was a student of Rav. Asked this Kasha Ravasi, who says she can even eat Truma. Can even eat Truma. And some say it was Chia Barav. Chia, the son of Rav, asked Ravasi. She's in Rishus until go to the chuppah. So how can you say she can eat the truma even though it's just because the father they handed her over to the husband? She's still in Rishus until she goes. There was no chuppah yet. Amalu Rav. So Rav told them. Who did he tell? His student Rav Huna and his son Chia. Didn't I tell you lo tizla basrifcha? Don't try to bring proofs from a case that could be from a mishnah could be understood ambiguously. It can be learned the other way around. He can answer, Rabasi can answer, as Rashi said before, handing her over is the equivalent of a chuppah. What is a chuppah? What is chuppah? So we have a Gemara talking about that. Is chuppah going into the cheder yichud? Is it just standing under the chuppah, under the sky? Is it a chuppah? Is handing her over to the husband? That's chuppah. Because he's acquired her already. She's really his wife with betrothal. This is just the final step. Some say chuppah is having bia. We had a whole discussion about that in the Gemara. Having bia, consummating is chuppah. Going into the cheder yichud is chuppah. Standing under the canopy is chuppah. You know what? Handing her over is also chuppah. That's what he can answer you. So that's not a kasha. But that's all what Rav and Ravasi said. Shmuel says no, only Yerusha. Shmuel says only, you know what it means? Handing her over just means that if she dies now, you can get the Yerusha. Meaning that we said before, we had a shal the other day, whether if she dies at B'shas Erusin, and there was already a ksuba, well, is she entitled to anything? Well, one shita was she's entitled to everything. The Chum says she's entitled to everything. The other shita was no. She's only entitled to 100 to 200. She's not entitled to everything. Shmuel says no. Even if you say now that the father didn't want to give her, he didn't mean to give all the stuff, all that he gave in the dowry, he didn't mean to give until she actually gets married. But once he handed her over, Hashtamach was given the son, they're getting married, etc. He can inherit her, but not for truma and not for breaking her nedarim. He can't now. The husband can't break the nedarim without the father, and he doesn't get her mitzias and paychecks presumably. Shmuel says only for Yerusha. In other words, handing over when we say when the husband or his messengers handed her over to the Baal or to the Baal's messengers. In what sense is it Rishus Baal? Only for Yerusha, but not for the other things. Rish Lakish for the ksuba. What do you mean ksuba samahi? The Mesa, what do you mean the ksuba? The Mesa, if she dies, the Arsla, you're going to hide in Shmuel, same as Shmuel. Shmuel says for the Yerusha. So he says, no, for the ksuba. Well, what does that mean? Yerusha mean that he inherits her, he inherits the ksuba. Doesn't that mean the same as Shmuel? No, it means to say this. The once they handed her over to the husband, in the she's married in what sense? That if her husband dies now, she's already a widow. And if she gets married again, she'd only be entitled to $100, even though they didn't consummate yet. She might still be a psula. So in that sense, for the ksuba, that she's only entitled to $100. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina say the same as Ravasi, that handing her over is like the chuppah in all aspects. She's his wife. He gets her paycheck. He gets her Yerusha if she dies. If he's a Kohen, he goes to her funeral, and he can even give her truma. Meisvei. Now we're going to ask a kasha on the shita that's his wife for everything. Meisvei. Halacha. This price is similar to the Mishmar that adds on more. Halacha mishulchi abal. Let's say the father went with the messengers of the husband. He didn't hand her over. He still accompanied them. Or his messengers went with their messengers. Or the wife owned a little, let's call it a bungalow on the way. She had a courtyard there on the way to the husband's town. They went into to lodge there, not to have bia. They didn't have bia, but they slept there. Even though the dowry has already been given over into the husband's rishus, it's in his house. Mace, if she dies of Yersher, her father inherits her because she hasn't been given over to the husband yet. There was no chuppah, and she hadn't been handed over. And even though they slept in the same building, it was her building. No, even though the ksuba is physically sitting in the husband's house, fact is that the father gets the Yerusha because she's not married yet. But if the father handed her over, the husband had a bungalow on the way to his town, had a chutzah there, and they slept in the v'nechsimo, and they slept in the v'nechsimo lishum nesuin. she went in there and they went, even though it wasn't consummate, but they slept there, the shame, the suin. That was like the chuppah. Even though the dowry is still sitting in her father's house, if she dies, Bali or the husband inherits her. Oh, so what do you see? That we gave her over they gave her over to the husband and they slept in the or if he didn't give her over, even if he didn't hand her over, but they slept together in a room, in a house, in his house, l'shem nesuin, for the purpose of nesuin, even though they didn't consummate, then the husband inherits her. Yerusha inherits her for the Yerusha, meaning what was written in the Ksuba, the dowry that the father gave, the husband, if she dies now, the husband gets it. Avala truma, no, you can't, she can't eat truma until she goes into the chuppah. And as we said before, because you're worried about simpun or right. So you see over here that like Shmuel, Rashi says it's a kasha not only on Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chanina and Rav Asi who say she eats truma, it's a kasha on everybody except for Shmuel. Anybody who says Shmuel says the only thing is you get the Yerusha. That's it. That's the only way it sends the husband. So it's a kasha on all those. Again, meaning that if the father gave her over to the husband for whatever reason, and they didn't consummate yet, the husband handed her over, and all this, the husband would inherit her now, but she's not a full wife yet. Until they actually consummate, there's not a full wife. Okay. So the Gemara says, but I have a little problem the way you talked about her bungalow or his bungalow. Hagufakasha. Amrit, you said if she goes with imo, she went with him to lodge. Tam Dalin, they just went into lodging. Then he didn't. The father didn't actually give her over yet. Hastama l'shem nesuin. Says they went in for lodging. They only went in for lodging. They didn't go l'shem nesuin. Mashma stam. They went in stam. That is l'nesuin. Ema seifa and l'shem nesuin. If she went in to his lodging for the purpose of nesuin, then they're considered married. Hastam l'lutz mashma stam is l'lin. So which one is stam? Amar Rashi stam is stamktani. It means they're both stam. What do you mean? Stam chatzah didolin. If it's her chatzah, if you go in stam without saying any specifically, it's just to sleep there, and therefore they're not considered like husband and wife. Stam chatzah, but his chatzah is l'nesuin. But again, they didn't consummate yet. He just said that if they went in stam and it's his chatzah, it's for nesuin. In what sense? In what sense that he yarshins her, but not for truma, not really for truma. Okay, that's as far as that brisa goes. So what do you see? That even though the father gave her over to the husband, then she's Rishus of the Baal. But in what sense Rishus of the Baal? Where the Gemara comes to only that he inherits her, but not for the other things. Tana Masar of the Shulchan Baal. Let's say the father gave her over to the Shulchan of the Baal. And as we said before, it's like they're married, but it's not really fully married, right? We said before that it's L'chol Davar Ish Be'isha, Yoshua Tamila. That's what he says, right? Rav said that because the Shulchan is like the Chuppah. But now we're saying it's not really like the Chuppah, not 100%. It's he inherits her. He inherits her because then the father gave her over. He's willing to say, fine, you can keep the ksuba now if something happens to her. That's his intention, but she's not really a full wife. But here's another point. Let's say the father gave her over to the shluchim the Baal, and now she committed adultery, right? And let's say she's a Nara Psula. Nara Psula commits adultery, punishment is skila, right? If she's fully married, punishment is chenek, right? So here he says, how do you know? In other words, it's like she's married. The pasuk says again by Motzi Shemra, Liznos Beisavia. When does she get skila? When she committed adultery, Motzi Shemra, and there's Adam that she committed adultery, Liznos Savia, Prat l'shemasar av l'shulchan Baal. That's only if she was Mazana in her father's house. But if the father already gave her over to the Shulchan Baal, then she's not getting skila, then she's like a married woman, she gets chenek. How do you know it excludes that? Maybe in this case, where she hasn't even had a chuppah yet, maybe she's really gets skila, like a Nara Psula, Morasa. Maybe she gets skila. What is Lisnos Beisavia? That's to exclude a case where she went into the chuppah yet, but she didn't have bia. She had bia, she had chuppah, but she didn't consummate yet. And why do you have to say it excludes that the case of skila is only if she's not married yet, like she's a Nara Morasa, and we said Lisnos in her father's house, it's excluding even in a case where the father handed her over. Maybe it's only excluding where they had a chuppah without bia. In that case, then we say that no longer skila. It's chenek if she had a chuppah. But if she didn't even have a chuppah, the father just handed her over, maybe you still get skila. How do you know that? You said you get chenek now if he handed her over. Why? Because there's no savia. In her father's house, then it's skila. Otherwise, she's not in her father's house. The father handed her over, then it's no longer skila. Maybe Lizno Savia is coming to exclude only the case where she had a chuppah, but she didn't have bia. But if the father just handed her over, maybe she'll get skila. Amarava, Amarli, Ami told me, chuppah behedek said, the chuppah we already know that if there was a chuppah, she gets chenek. If there's a chuppah, even not be. Why? Because it says Kiyeh Nara Basulam Orsli. It's the same right after the parsha of Motzi Shem that says Kiyeh Nara, she's 12 to 12 and a half. Basula, she's a virgin. Rasa betrothed Leish. Nara, Lobageris excluded. She's not 12 and a half. Basula Labula, she's a virgin. She's not already had somebody had bia. Rasa V'lo Nesua. If she's betrothed, they're not married. The Nesua. What do you mean by Nesua? Elaim in Nesua. Mom, she's literally married. She's already been married. She's had bia with him. That's not excluded from Psula V'Lavula. If she's already had bia with him, we already know that she's no longer psuling, wouldn't get skila. What does Ma'orasa mean? Tell me that she didn't have a chuppah yet. So we already have a pasuk telling me that if she had a chuppah, she no longer gets skila and she gets chenek now. What does Lizno's base of bia teach me? Teaches me that even if you didn't have a chuppah yet, if we had a chuppah and no bia, we already know that she gets chenek based on Nesua, Nara, it says Kiyeh Nara Basula Ma'orasa, engaged, betrothed, excluding chuppah without bia. You had chuppah already? No more skila. Now it's chenek. So Lizna's base of bia teaches me even if you didn't have a chuppah, but if he handed her over, also it's no longer skila. It's now chenek. Beima, maybe I'll say this. Okay, so let's say he handed her over. What happens if he handed her over and then she came back? Beima hecha the hardul lebeina. She went back to her father's house. Hardul milsa kamaisa. What do you mean by that? Rashi says, she's just the husband, the mashma, even chazman the derech the base of via kvar yatz mishazav. Let's say she had kivin l'nafka mesir shluchin ela mikra yiser the base of via aim hecha the harder base of via couldn't be vim. In other words, maybe if she comes back to her father's house, it's like another kasha. You're saying since you know that what? How do you know that if you're going to get chenek if she handed her over? Because there's no base of via. She's no longer base of. Let's say though, changed her mind. She went back, whatever. They decided not to carry out the marriage, and she went back to her father's house. Maybe she go back to the house. She gets skila again. Amarava, no. Once she's considered a wife in the sense that she's only going to get chenek, and you don't go back. Amarava hu kfar paska Tanrei Shmuel. Tanrei Shmuel already paskin that. He already decided that Tanrei Shmuel paskin like this. A husband can break his wife's netter, and a father can break his daughter's netter up until the age of 12 and a half. What happens if she's widowed or divorced? She was married and she's widowed or divorced. So who breaks the netter now? If she's an almana gusha, there's nobody to break the marriage. What's the chiddush in that? Why does pasuk say a father can break his daughter's netter and a husband can break his wife's netter? Pasuk says if she's widowed or divorced, there's nobody to break her netter. It's obvious. She doesn't have a father. She's out of her father's house. She doesn't have a husband. Obviously, she's out of her father's house. And her husband's dead. Who else is there to break her netter, right? She's already left her father when she got married, and the husband's not in the picture anymore. He's either dead or divorced. Ella, what's a chiddush? Let's say this case where the father gave her over to the shluchim the baal. The father gave her over to the husband, and she became widowed while they were on the road, or he divorced her then. What do I consider her? Do I consider her in her father's house or in her husband's house? Which one is it? If it's the husband's dead now. Or maybe she goes back to her father. Once she left the father's house, that's the point of Neder Almana Grusha. Yes, if you were fully married and divorced or widowed, of course, there's nobody to break the netter now. She's not in her father's rishus anymore, wants to get married. And the husband's dead or divorced. So what are you talking about? What's the chiddush? The chiddush is the father handed her over. He wasn't really married yet. Father handed her over, and she became widowed or divorced. Does she go back to her father, or is she considered the husband and the husband's dead or divorced? Mashma, no. Once she left the father's house, you can't break it netter anymore. In other words, you don't go back to the father's house. Once he handed her over, you don't go back. What do we say? We said this started off by saying that Ravashi, not Rashi, was it? Ravami Barachama said, or the Brisa said, Masra Avashusha Balvis Insa, she gets chenek. Once he handed her over to the husband, it's chenek, there's no more skila, even though there was no chuppah yet. If a man slept with an amarosa, she's got to be all three. There's a chayv skila is only if she's a nara up until the age of 12 and a half. Obviously, up and below 12, she's a katana, and he would be killed, but she wouldn't be killed if she was engaged. She's a now 12, she's a psula, she's a virgin, marasa, all those things. But he bevesavia. He says the Baisa says, Anam Rasa, he's not chayv skila unless now marasa psula and she's in her father's house. The Bishlam Nara, that's exclude Bagir, she's not 12 and a half. Psula is exclude Bahula, she's not a virgin. Murasa to exclude Nasua. Once she's in the Sua, she gets chenek. The Vesavia, what is Vesavia with her mind? What is Vesavia? She's in her father's house. My lab lamute. Once he's handed her over, no longer skila, now it would be chenek. I also learned that a bal ish. If a man slept with a married woman, once she came into the rishus of the baal and a suin, officially, even though there was no bia yet, a bal is a bechenek. Right? Nichnasa l'rishus habal. It says ba'alma. It doesn't say he had chuppah. It says kivin shenichnas l'rishus l'nesuin. Doesn't say there was chuppah. It just said she went into his rishus, even though there was no bia yet and there was no chuppah. You see, that's good at that she's chayav chanek already, not skila. Shema mina, you see from here. We'll pick the mission tomorrow, Mr. Have a good day, everybody.
Yes.